So when the iPhone SE3 came out, I said to buy the iPhone XR instead. Well, of course, the SE3 is out, I already have the iPhone XR, so I thought, why not compare both and see which is the better buy? And so let's do just that, but first make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumours, and with that being said, let's just tuck in. So let's first begin with the colours. Now yes, I know some of you guys might not care about this, but I know there are many who do, and that's where the XR shines, because you get a variety of great colours with the XR that just destroys the really boring Starlight, Midnight, and product red colour options the SE gets. Now don't get me wrong, the red does look nice, but these colours have been available on the iPhone for a long time, so of course, the XR having coral, yellow, and the very nice blue is pretty nice. Now delving into prices, I know the XR is not available new, but of course, Apple still sells it on their refurb site, and those phones, in case you don't know, are practically new because they changed the battery and the outer case. So let's now delve into the design, size, and builds, and I'll be honest, I know this may seem like a landslide victory for the XR because of the much newer design. The SE has surprised me. I was expecting to hate on this phone, but I do like the size a lot. And for those wanting ease of use with one hand, the SE is the way to go. Since 6.1 inches might seem small, but because of the thick bezels the LCD panel has on the XR, this makes the body much wider, thicker, and also heavier than the SE, which is pretty unwieldy. And so yes, if you do prefer smaller phones, the SE is the way to go, but of course, if you do want a much bigger screen that actually looks very similar to the flagship iPhones, the XR is the way to go. Now moving on to the displays, the tech is very similar across these devices. The only thing you're choosing from is of course whether you want a bigger size that's way better for watching content, or you want something that's easier to use. And yes, again, I thought the XR would easily win this, but I can see why someone would appreciate the SE screen size, since it is very easy to reach all the corners of the device. But the actual displays themselves, while being sub 1080p, do still look great, and yes, I have no issues with the brightness, the contrast ratio, and the overall sharpness of these panels. I guess the only issue is, of course, dark mode isn't as great on these phones as OLED, but honestly Apple does a pretty good job with the blacks with these LCD panels. Now moving on to the speakers, they both have a stereo setup where the earpiece and the bottom speaker work together to of course give you a stereo effect, and well, the XR with the bigger body does give you much better sound in my opinion. But here's a sample of both of these devices so that you can decide for yourself. A Studio Display Pro with mini LED tech wouldn't be launching at WWDC. Now this did go against Ross Young's report, and now Ross Young's given us a response regarding Quo's report. A Studio Display Pro with mini LED tech wouldn't be launching at WWDC. Now this did go against Ross Young's report, and now Ross Young's given us a response regarding Quo's report. Now moving on to the biometrics, we have Face ID on the XR and Touch ID on the iPhone SE3. Now this is where the SE3 wins over the XR completely, because Face ID is great indoors, but outdoors when wearing a mask, it becomes completely useless. And yes, I know that Apple did release an update where Face ID works with a mask, but do remember that only applies to the 12 and the 13, so the XR is going to struggle outdoors, and so for that, the convenience of Touch ID is pretty nice. And yes, while both are relatively similar in terms of speeds, I do still kind of prefer having Touch ID, I can't lie. Anyways, moving to the cameras, the selfie cameras are identical on both models. They look decent, but they obviously aren't as great as the flagship models. And as for the rear cameras, the XR are surprisingly good. Now yes, I know the A15 Magic is working on the older sensor the SE3 has. In fact, I believe both of these phones have the same sensor, but of course, the SE3 looks slightly better because of the A15 Magic. So yes, very similar camera experiences for the most part. Just consider you get newer features with the SE like photographic styles and also more portrait mode features. Now, battery life is where the SE3 struggles, and that's my big issue with the SE, because as much as I do like the size and can forgive the bezels, the battery life is not great, and that's kinda not acceptable when the XR, of course, gives us way better battery life. So yes, in my preliminary testing, the XR pretty much consistently gets 1 or 2 more hours of battery life. And so yes, for those who care about battery life, having a physically much larger battery in the XR does help a lot. And by the way, charging speeds are identical for these phones, so yes, XR is just the better buy if you want a much better battery experience. Now moving to connectivity, the SE3 does have Wi-Fi 6, which is a newer standard, and could give you faster Wi-Fi. But also more importantly, the SE does have a Qualcomm modem inside it, which not only gives you 5G support, but is a lot more reliable than the Intel modem in the XR. And yeah, I used to hate the Intel modems with the older iPhones, and that is something to note if you're going to go for the XR instead. And yes, I know that 5G is hated on, but of course, at the end of the day, it does give you better speeds. However, 5G does kill the SE3's battery life, and also 5G is not available everywhere yet. Now of course, performance-wise, we do have the much faster A15 chip in the SE, but do note, for day-to-day use, you really do not see much of a difference between these devices. And yes, I know the SE has slightly more RAM, and the gaming experience might be slightly better, but do note, gaming on a 4.7-inch screen kinda sucks, and I'd much rather have the weaker A12 chip, but with the larger 6.1-inch screen, if I want to game. And yes, I know the SE is going to get longer support, but to be honest, I'd much rather have the XR for 4 years and live with the new design and much better battery life than have the SE for 6 or 7 years and put up with the terrible battery life that's only going to get worse. So yes, pick your poison I guess, but I do think the XR is the better buy, even with the older A12 chip. And yes, I think my conclusion still stands. If you do want a new iPhone, the XR for the most part is going to be the much better buy, because that larger display, the much better battery life, and a very similar camera experience is going to be solid. However, to be honest, after buying the SE myself, I can somewhat understand the appeal, because if you love Touch ID and the home button and love the 4.7-inch size, then yeah, the SE is the way to go. That being said, you can also buy the SE2 instead, which again is going to be cheaper through third parties and is going to give you a very similar experience. But tell me in the comments below guys, which one would you get? Anyways, thank you for watching guys, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumours. Check out the link above on details regarding Apple's VR headset, and on that note I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya peeps!